They had been calling it settling. 3 days of tremors moving through the metallite warrens of dust like a slow exhalation, and the 12,000 people who lived in those tunnels had named it the way people name things they cannot afford to fear. Structural settling, a shelf giving way, the ordinary violence of a dying world doing what dying worlds do. Serethi Voss did not believe it. She had grown up in these tunnels. She knew the difference between a wall giving way and a wall being asked a question. On the morning of the 4th day, she stood at the mouth of the lowest warren junction, her pale grey eyes reading the cracked substrate the way a reader reads a page, and the answer she found there was not geological. She pulled Kael from the armory and Iolen from her portable clinic and told them they were going down. Not down the way the warrens went, the shallow lateral burrows of human survival, but down the way the tremors went, which was deeper than any human hand had ever dug. Kael said nothing. He checked the charge on his sidearm with his prosthetic left hand, the matte black joint mechanisms clicking once, and followed her without question. Dr. Iolen Marz clipped her diagnostic lenses over her washed-out hazel eyes and pulled her spectral analyzer from the coat pocket where it lived, the cuffs of her medical synthweave already stained with the morning's reagent work. She said only that she was reading thermal anomalies 12 meters below the shaft's known terminus, 12 meters below the floor of the world. The access shaft at the warren's lowest level descended through compressed rust-orange metallite, its walls scored in perfect geometric spirals by tools that had not been human. The rungs were corroded alloy, slick with condensation. The 3 of them descended in single file, Serethi first, then Kael, then Iolen, the amber emergency strips giving out at the 3rd level, the darkness below them absolute, except for the faint blue-white pulse that had begun to breathe along hairline seams in the rock. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became. The smell changed, from the recycled polymer and sweat of the warrens to something older, something that had no name in the vocabulary of a world that had been dying for 3 centuries. Iolen's spectral analyzer began cycling through frequencies faster than she had programmed it to, as if the instrument itself was trying to comprehend what it was measuring. The blue-white pulse in the walls strengthened with every meter of descent. Her binding scars had been quiet since the cradle, since the severance. She had told herself they were gone, that the luminous veins spreading from the base of her skull were a scar in the truest sense, a record of something that had ended. In the shaft, at the 4th level, they began to glow. Not the way they had burned at the cradle, softly, the way a fire glows through a closed door. The shaft ended not at rock, but at a seam, a geometric line in the metallite that ran perfectly horizontal, perfectly straight, perfectly impossible in any natural formation. Kael pressed his prosthetic left hand to it and felt the vibration even through the synthetic nerves his father had paid to have installed before the hand was taken. The seam did not respond to him. It was not his door to open. Serethi descended past him to the seam. She did not press her hand to it deliberately. She simply moved toward it the way water moves toward a drain, drawn by something older than intention. The seam opened. Not explosively, not with drama. It simply opened, the metallite separating along lines that had been waiting for this moment for 8,000 years. And the air that came up from below smelled of rain. The chamber below was not a room. A room is a human thing, scaled to human bodies and human purposes. This was a space made by something that thought in kilometers, a sphere of impossible scale lined with progenitor substrate pulsing deep blue-white along geometric seams, the light moving in slow waves from the outer walls toward the center, where a platform of dark alien material rose from the floor surrounded by concentric rings of glowing script. The script rotated, slowly, with the terrible patience of a machine that has been running for 8 millennia and has only now been given something to count. Iolen raised her spectral analyzer and watched it cycle through frequencies, her diagnostic lenses flicking through spectra faster than a human eye could follow. The readings were not geological, they were not structural, they were sequential. Iolen spoke the word that none of them had been prepared to hear: autonomous. The activation sequence was running autonomously. No command had been given. No speaker had spoken the phrase. No bloodline had pressed a hand to the interface and asked for this. The sequence had begun on its own. The analyzer told them why. The Cradle's severed command channel, the one Serethi had burned out of the progenitor network at the cost of her own binding, had not simply gone silent when she cut it. It had sent a final pulse through every dormant node in the network before the connection died. A last transmission, automatic, reflexive, the way a severed nerve fires once before it goes dark. And the seed, buried in the rock beneath the world that had once been Solabri Prime, had received that pulse and interpreted it the only way its 8,000-year-old architecture knew how, as a command, as permission. As the beginning of the sequence it had been waiting to run since the War of 9 Suns. Serethi walked to the platform. Her binding scars moved with her, the luminous veins brightening with each step, the chamber responding to her approach the way a compass responds to a pole. Not with intelligence, not with recognition, but with orientation. The script on the concentric rings did not change for her. It did not slow or pause or offer her a choice. It rotated with the same patient indifference it would have shown to anyone or to no one. She was not the commander of this sequence. She was simply the person standing in its light. Kael stood at the edge of the platform and looked up. The chamber's ceiling was hundreds of meters above them, but he knew what lay above it: compressed metallite, the deep shaft they had descended, and somewhere above that, a patch of rust-orange surface where he had wrapped his father in ship-hull fabric and pressed a blade into the ground. Lord Thyros had known. The knowledge settled into Kael the way the tremors had settled into the Warrens. Not as a shock, but as a confirmation of something the body had already understood. His father had known the seed was here, had known what it was, had spent decades keeping the secret, and had placed his grave above it like a marker, or a warning, or a last act of custody over a thing he could not destroy and could not give away. The blade in the grave was not grief. It was a map. Iolen read the countdown aloud. Her voice was steady because she had trained it to be steady in the moments when steadiness was the only useful thing she could offer. The number she read, the cycles remaining before the seed's activation sequence completed, was not a geological timescale. It was not centuries or decades or even years. It was weeks, and the terraforming engine buried beneath the feet of 12,000 people would fire. And when it fired, it would do what it had been built to do: reconfigure a planet's elemental composition at the atomic level, unmake and rebuild a biosphere from base elements, transform dust into something that could sustain life, or into something that could sustain nothing at all. The seed did not distinguish between restoration and sterilization. That distinction had always been the speaker's responsibility, and there was no speaker. There was only the echo of a severed command and a countdown, and 3 people standing in the rain-scented dark of a chamber that smelled of a world being born. They looked at each other across the rotating light of the seed's patient arithmetic. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that the chamber was not already saying, in the only language it had ever known. They climbed back up in silence. The seam sealed behind them with the same quiet inevitability with which it had opened. At the 3rd level, the amber emergency strips came back on, and the blue-white pulse faded from the walls. and the shaft was just a shaft again, corroded alloy rungs, sweating metalite, the smell of recycled air. But the three of them were not the same people who had descended. At the surface, the Warrens were going about their morning, scavengers spreading their finds on corroded metal blankets, the water distribution queue moving in its slow, patient shuffle, children running through the wider junctions with the specific joy of people who have never known anything larger. Serethi stood at the shaft entrance and watched them. Her binding scars had gone quiet again, but she could still feel the chamber below, the way you feel a sound after it has stopped, in the bones and the teeth and the place behind the sternum where dread lives. She had severed the command channel to keep the progenitors from returning. She had burned out her own binding to close the door. And the last thing the door had done before it closed was whisper to the thing buried beneath her childhood home and tell it to wake up. The inheritance Marin had whispered to her in a dying night was not a gift. It was a responsibility with a deadline. Kael stood beside her, his prosthetic hand at his side, his father's ghost in his eyes. He did not look at the shaft entrance. He had already looked at everything he needed to see down there. What he looked at now was the water queue. The children, the scavengers, the 12,000 people who had built their lives in the bones of a world that was about to decide what it wanted to be. Iolen was already composing the transmission she would need to send to Valan, to Lysara, to anyone with enough progenitor language to understand what the script on those rotating rings actually said. Her diagnostic lenses were still cycling, still reading, the spectral analyzer tucked under her arm, its data stored and waiting. She was the first person in recorded history to document an autonomous progenitor activation sequence. She did not feel like a historian, she felt like a clock. The chroniclers who came after would write that she stood there for a long time before she moved, that Kael stood beside her with his prosthetic hand at his side and his father's ghost in his eyes, that Iolen was already composing the transmission she would need to send. What none of the chroniclers could write, because none of them were there, was what the three of them felt in that moment before the weight of it became action and strategy, and the brutal logistics of saving 12,000 lives from the ground they stood on. What they felt was something older than fear and younger than grief, something that had no name in any language the living spoke. The seed was counting, and the world above it did not yet know. Below the rust-orange metalite, below the Warrens and the water queues and the children who had never seen rain, the concentric rings of an 8,000-year-old engine rotated in the dark with the patience of something that had waited this long and could wait a little longer. The number on those rings was not a sentence, not yet, but it was becoming one, and the only people who knew it were already moving.